Ever since the end of the Second World War, the United States has maintained a strong military presence in Germany. As of 2024, the country is thought to be home to about 50 U.S. military installations and over 50,000 personnel, making it the largest contingent of American troops in a single country in Europe. While originally meant to bulk up Western European defenses in the event of a Soviet invasion, the American bases in Germany have become the central hub for all U.S. military activity in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And with Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and its posturing against Europe, it doesn't look like American troops will be leaving Germany anytime soon. Germany is beautiful. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to spend more than a few days traveling the country, but I know from my research and general experience that the culture, the food, the landscapes, all of it is very nice. Not to mention my growing appreciation for Germany's history dating back to the medieval period. So many of our modern fairy tales and children's stories come from Germany. And maybe there's a reason for that. According to German folklore, the forests and castles are home to all kinds of supernatural beings. Ghosts, witches, goblins, vampires, fairies, werewolves, shapeshifters. Even today, we might think many or all of these are just stories and nothing else, but they still give us the creeps. If you were to ask the servicemen in these following stories, however, these German folk tales aren't just myths or legends. In dark, remote areas that these men found themselves training in, childhood nightmares suddenly became very real. This is the Smoke Pit, and these are stories shared by servicemen about their encounters with strange things in Germany. The Pake Crawler.
Let's keep the white lights off. I don't want to give away our position too early.
Roger that.
Hold up. Where's that coming from?
Sounded like it was over there. 2 o'clock. Tree line.
Might be a deer. If it's the sniper team, they are sloppy. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything on the nods. Switching to thermal.
There it is. You see it?
Yeah. Is that a person? What the hell is that?
He's standing up.
Sergeant, are we sure that's... Whoa! Wait, where'd he go?
Well, don't just stand there. Move. Let's go.
Yes, Sergeant.
This first story was originally submitted to Nick Orton's Tales from the Grid Square Project. An anonymous soldier with the U.S. Army shared an unnerving experience he had while in Germany. Located in Bavaria, the Grafenwohr Training Area, or simply the GTA, was first established by the German military in 1910. Coming under new management in 1945, it is now known as the U.S. Army's largest and most advanced overseas training facility. With over 232 square kilometers of live-fire ranges, maneuver areas, and barracks, the base is often teeming with activity, both military and apparently paranormal. I'm not sure if you've had anyone in Germany see weird stuff, but this is my story. A few years ago, deep in the forests of the Grafenwohr Training Area in Germany, members of our recon and sniper teams were conducting a nighttime training exercise. The objective was straightforward. One team would set up a hidden surveillance site, and hours later, around 0100, 0300, another team would try to locate them. I was on the tracking team that night. We drove in quietly, parked the GMV, and continued on foot down a narrow, silent road. Our eyes were scanning the darkness using NVGs, thermals, and white light. The area was thick with tension, but it was no different than any other late-night exercise. Well, until it wasn't. We'd been walking for a while when we heard rustling in the tree line off to our right. At first, we thought it might be an animal, or maybe even one of the snipers moving around for counter recon. I flicked my NVGs to thermal, the screen flickered, warmed, it lit up. And I saw it. Something was there, in the tree line. It looked human, at first. Pale, gaunt, too skinny. Its limbs were long, almost exaggerated, and it had the unmistakable posture of something trying and failing to mimic being human. As we approached, it stood upright, towering, slightly hunched, and motionless, just watching us. We were weirded out, but we just thought it was, one of our guys playing a part in the training scenario, so we didn't panic. But then, without warning, this thing just turned and bolted into the woods. It moved fast, like inhumanly fast. Within seconds, it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Probably more out of instinct than logic because of the training scenario, we took off after it. We chased it. Our boots are pounding through the underbrush as we are pushing deeper and deeper into the woods. And as we're running, out of nowhere, the night just explodes with a sound that I will never forget. It was a growl. A deep, guttural, just wrong growl. If I were to describe it, it sounded part human, but not. So, part human, part beast. Whatever it was clearly not friendly, all malice. And this growl stopped us dead in our tracks. We all heard it, we had all seen it. We knew then that this wasn't part of the training exercise. This thing was clearly some kind of animal or God knows what. We pulled out of there as fast as we possibly could. Later that night, we got in contact with the other team, the ones we were supposed to be tracking. They were nowhere near our position. In fact, they'd been operating on the complete opposite side of the training area, and no one else was supposed to be out there. What's even more creepy was that this apparently wasn't the first time this thing had been seen. We found out later that some of the other guys in our platoon had reported seeing this same pale, skinny, human-like creature the year before. No one believed them then. Everyone just figured they were sleep-deprived or playing it up for laughs, but now? I can't speak for the other guys, but after that night, I didn't doubt them. We're trained observers, recon and sniper teams. We don't jump at shadows. We know what we see. And we saw something that night on the GTA that none of us could explain. The werewolf.
Terrified by the creature inside the house, the men grabbed their torches and set fire to it. They stood around and watched it burn to ashes. And that was that. Nothing and no one ever came out.
Damn. What a story. Actually Has me a little freaked out.
Yes, it's been passed around here for, I don't know, since I was a boy. Not many people like to talk about it, though.
Really? How come?
Because they're afraid, of course. Have you noticed that people around here don't like to stay out after dark? Or that we keep our distance from the woods? That story is more than just a legend to people in these parts.
Does that include you?
Well, yes. I probably shouldn't even be talking about it. To even mention the beast is supposed to bring bad luck. But it is probably just an old...
Hey, look. Do you see that? Down there. Something just came out of the tree line.
Richard, get inside. Right now.
What is...
I mean it. Now.
When I was reading the previous story about the Grafenvor training area, I couldn't help but notice striking similarities between the creature the soldiers saw and a creature commonly referred to as a rake or Pake Crawler. While they're typically associated with North American indigenous mythology, creatures similar to the Pake Crawler have also popped up in African, Arabic, Asian, and European folklore. The creature's personality and abilities vary between each culture, but what really struck me as interesting were the claims that some crawlers have the ability to shapeshift into human beings or various animals. German folklore, in particular, is full of legends about shapeshifting entities, the most infamous of which has to be the werewolf. From a modern perspective, werewolves have long been considered imaginary. But according to this next story, werewolves are more than just legends to those living in the towns and villages scattered across the German countryside. In some cases, it's something that they still live in fear of to this day. The account was sent to me a while back by a U.S. Army veteran named Richard. He writes, "While stationed in Germany, I caught the travel bug more than the stay in the barracks, drink yourself to death bug. I figured I'd have better adventures touring Europe that way. Being an amateur historian, I spent a lot of my time running around learning as much as I could that wasn't about World War I or World War II. I learned about the Roman colonization, architecture, Gaul, and the like. But I also learned about the myths and legends of the area as well. The usual stuff, monsters, myths, spooky castles. Hey, one in Europe, right? One afternoon, about midweek, I decided I wanted to go towards the city of Schwangau, where the fairy castle Neuschwanstein is located, or at least just outside of it. I figured I'd have a great time since it was winter, there were a lot of local festivals, parties, great food, and whatnot. I arrived and there was a light snowfall. I made it to the city and managed to relax a bit while I was there. I had the occasional Dunkelweissen beer and great food in the area I was staying at. I was staying at a local hostel. The hosts were a very nice couple who treated us well. I guess they appreciated that we weren't being jerks or, in their minds, typical Americans. That evening, I was on their balcony, which overlooks a small wooded area, and enjoying my host's company. This area I was in was a bit outside of town and more near the main highway or Autobahn. Some areas were well lit, others not so much. So, at some point in the conversation, my host asks me what brought me there. I said it was for the history, and that I also wanted to explore the area, and remembering some of the spooky myths I'd heard around town, I made some offhanded quip about hoping nothing too scary would get me this evening. At this, he laughed, and he said, "Well, historically, we have our fair share of monsters in this area. If you know your history, you know of the werewolf." Now, at the time, I didn't mind the tall tales and local legends, and being that we were enjoying a couple of drinks, I figured the more he had to drink, the better the story was going to be, so I casually sipped my glass and listened to him, and he did not disappoint. He started by explaining that the area used to be comprised of 3 villages back in the old days, and not one city as it was today. This was around the 14th or 15th century, so bear in mind that the passage of time tends to distort such records and stories. This is the story he told me. One summer day, the town was preparing for a big festival, since the Germans don't need much of an excuse to party. The harvest had been plenty, the work was about done, and things were looking great. The evening's festivities were scheduled to start with a gathering of all of the townsfolk and those of 2 adjacent towns coming for a great feast. But towards mid-afternoon, a small child wandered into the village, covered from head to toe in blood. The villagers raced to her, and they recognized her as being from the village nearest to them. They tried to help the child as much as they could, but she didn't survive. Before she died from her injuries, though, she told the villagers of a beast that massacred her entire village. Enraged, the townsfolk grabbed their weapons and set out to hunt this thing down. On their way, they encountered several farms, which had also been massacred. Whole herds of cattle were wiped out, and the homes were barely standing. There was a corpse that looked like a pack of wolves tore it limb from limb. After reaching the second town, the result was the same. The village had been wiped out, and there wasn't a single living soul around. No animals, no people, nothing. Just the smell of blood, body parts, and a dead silence filling the air. The hunting party decided to go towards the third and furthest village to see if it had been spared. They were not. At first, it seemed like everyone here had also been wiped out. But then, something started moving. The town's main hall was mostly still intact, and there were signs of life coming from inside. After the hunting party's leader called out, they were met with a bone-chilling howl from within the residence. One of the men attempted to storm the hall in an effort to try and slay the creature inside, but he was instantly thrown back through the front door, which then slammed shut. Terrified, the posse then set fire to the building and watched it burn to ashes. And that was that. Nothing ever came out of it. When he finished telling the story, it had me feeling a bit creeped out. I asked the guy if he had any other stories to share. He told me that people around the town don't like going out at night. Something about it just doesn't feel right at times, even for those who grew up there. He said that to even speak about the werewolf invites all kinds of bad luck. And it was at that moment that I caught sight of something and pointed it out to him over the edge of the balcony. This thing, I can only describe it as being of unnatural height and posture, was looking at us from the tree line. We watched it step out into the moonlight, and it looked like it was observing us. It was sniffing the air. The ears were on top of its head, and they were kind of twitching like a dog. And when my host saw it, he immediately told me to get inside. And not knowing what else to do, I did, and he quickly followed me in. Whatever this thing was disappeared back into the woods. And I don't know who called them, but the police arrived on the scene a little while later and began a thorough search of the area around this guy's house. The officers were carrying automatic rifles and shotguns. They were G36s, which I kind of thought was odd since those were typically assigned to the German army. I'd never seen them carried by local police forces, at least that's my understanding. This was different though. The police officers' mannerisms, posture, the way they were moving around the area through the forest, it was as if they were actually hunting for something. The police patrolled the area for maybe 2 to 3 hours before piling back into their vehicles and leaving. From the house, I could only see about 3 officers, but I'd venture to say there were a lot more based on all the police activity in the area. As they were leaving, it looked like they were trying to cover up tracks or something. From the balcony, we watched as they scanned the ground and were kicking dirt and snow over certain areas. This made us curious, but there was no way we were going to go out there then to investigate this while it was still dark. The next morning, my host and I found some courage and we went to go check out the forest. We searched the ground and found a single print that the police clearly didn't catch. So I wear a size 10.5 wide to 11 wide boot, depending on the manufacturer. This print went from the tip of my toes to about mid-heel, but the width was, by my best guess, about 1/2 inch wider on both sides. It was large and definitely not human. The best way I could describe it would be if you took a wolf's footprint and applied it to a PowerPoint presentation, stretched it width-wise beyond the size of a coffee can, and elongated the toes. I even remember seeing very distinct nail marks. I'm happy to say that the encounter didn't stop me from traveling the area. I even stayed there again from time to time and drank with some of the same people. But I will never forget that moment. I know, it is a very wild story, and I can't begin to make sense of it. Over the fence.
Jeez.
You want to get on the wire and tell command that we got 3 super dead deer inside the perimeter?
What do you think could have done this? It's like a whole pack of wolves got to them.
Probably some of those wild boars we got running around here. Those things can get nasty sometimes.
I didn't know pigs ate deer.
Yeah, pretty sure.
That's wild.
Yeah, at least I think so. You can ask the forest meister when he gets here.
But are they vicious enough to kill 3 of them like? You still think it was a pig?
Command, this is P4. We found some mutilated deer over by the southern fence line break, and we just heard what sounds like a wolf inside the perimeter. How copy? Over.
Roger that, P4. We heard it as well. Report back to security control and arm up. I would start moving back towards the command post. Over.
This next story was originally shared by an Air Force veteran on unexplainedmysteries.com back in 2012. The actual events had taken place in the late 1980s. The story provoked readers to discuss its correlation with another story about a creature known as the Morbach monster, this being one of the more well-known, much more recent werewolf legends. The veteran's story takes place on the grounds of Hahn Air Force Base in western Germany, near the town of Wittlich. One night in 1988, a few airmen were making their way back to base after a night out on the town. As they walked along a forest path, they passed a small shrine tucked into the brush. According to locals, the shrine had been placed there long ago as a way to ward off the vengeful spirit of a werewolf. According to the myth, so long as the eternal flame at its center kept burning, the beast would be kept at bay. There was only one problem. That night, for whatever reason, the eternal flame had burned out. Under the influence of a few drinks, the airmen started egging each other on and then approached the shrine. They made off-colored jokes and called out the supposed werewolf, daring it to come forward. Nothing happened, and so the men went on their way, laughing it all off as a good joke. But according to a member of the 50th Security Police Squadron stationed at Hahn Air Force Base in 1988, writing under the handle of Sierra 7, their little joke didn't turn out to be as funny as they thought. He writes, "When we first came on duty, my patrols would do a sweep of their assigned sectors. As I was in the security trailer reading the previous shift's logs, one of my foot patrols found 3 dead deer within one of the wooded areas and radioed us. When I arrived on scene, I noticed that their throats were damaged and 2 had their entrails and hindquarters eaten, along with what appeared to be their internal organs, liver, heart. We did have wild boars in and out of the area that sometimes went after small deer species like these. We placed a call to the local forestmeister, basically a forest ranger, so he could remove the deer carcasses. I went back to the security control trailer to phone the base about the incident. After that, I radioed all patrols for an area briefing at control. As the patrols rolled in, we heard a low but loud growl/howl coming from the direction of our only alarmed structures. I radioed the foot patrol assigned to that area since they were still on their way. And as I did, they came running out of the darkness, yelling, 'Did you guys hear that?' About that time, it howled again. It sounded like it was within our fence line. I called the entry control point to see if they had permitted any canine patrols in the area. They said no, and also reported having heard the howling. One of the guys said, 'What if it's the werewolf?' And we all kind of laughed. But then it howled again, this time from the center of the site. I called the base to inform them that we had a breach of some kind of animal, probably some kind of large dog. They stated that the forestmeister had been called and was on his way. I asked the patrols if they wanted me to turn on the area lighting, and they said no. The area lighting usually made matters worse since they cast too many shadows and often messed with our night vision. I issued night vision scopes to our patrol leaders, which mounted onto our M16s. I informed them that they did not have permission to lock and load. Since it was peacetime, Cold War, we carried our weapons with a loaded magazine, weapon on safe, and no round in the chamber. I took one of the foot patrols with me, strength in numbers, and headed to the perimeter in case this thing tried to circle my guys. I went by the fallen deer to show the patrol, and when we got there, I noticed that the 3rd deer had also now been eaten. I immediately notified all the patrols that whatever this was had come back and fed on the 3rd deer. About that time, one of the mounted patrols had made contact and said over the radio that they were pursuing a large canine. We ran in a circular route to try to outflank whatever it was that they were chasing. The entry gate radioed me, saying that our own canine patrol had arrived and I had them dispatched to the western fence line since that's where we were all going. The pursuing patrol radioed that this thing was now turning towards the command trailer. Here's the funny part. Alpha Control, who was inside the trailer, radioed that he was locking down and wasn't opening the door until daylight. I took the foot patrol and headed to the fence line, since we had 2 patrols going back to control. The canine patrol was already there at the fence, so I dispatched him back to the alarmed structures to stand by. I did this since those structures were between control and the perimeter fence. When we got to the fence, I put one of the guys near the perimeter, and the patrol leader and I headed to a small hill to overwatch his position. Around that time, I started to hear a lot of yelling from the other patrols, so I got on the radio and asked for a situation report, and the response back was that this thing was now heading toward us. I radioed control to turn on our sector's lighting. Our area was mostly open, with trees on the right side. Me and the patrol leader went to switch off our scopes, and that's when the guy that we left at the fence line started screaming. We turned in time to see a huge, dark mass clear our 9-foot fence. It quickly faded from our perimeter lighting out into the darkness. I immediately asked for the area lighting to be turned back off. I walked further up the hill and switched on my night scope. I looked in the direction this thing had run, and that's when I saw it. It was leaned up against a tree, looking at us, standing on its hind legs. I yelled out its position at 2 o'clock, 200 meters, and it just kind of turned and faded into the leaves. To my knowledge, only one other patrol leader saw it. It was around 2:30 a.m. when the Forestmeister arrived at the entry gate. I had to go sign him in, so I asked the canine unit to do a foot patrol along the fence line. But the dog was really spooked. Poor thing just retreated into his kennel and refused to come out. I put all units back on active patrol and told them to remain extra vigilant. As I escorted the Forestmeister to the dead deer, I explained what had happened. He listened carefully and seemed to be taking it all in. He took pictures of the deer for the records and then bagged up the bodies. He said that it didn't appear to be the work of a wild boar. It had all the markings of a wolf attack. But the Meister himself was a bit confused. He said wolves usually didn't kill their prey outright. Their typical MO was to wound the animal and wait for it to collapse from shock or blood loss before eating the hindquarters while it was still alive. But it looked as if this one just straight up killed the deer and started eating, as evidenced by the neck injuries. I asked if wolves could jump a 9-foot fence. He shrugged and said, "This one could," and laughed. The guys were jazzed, to say the least. We had a group meeting around 4 a.m., and I told everyone that I needed written reports by shift's end at 06:30. Alpha 2, the guy who locked himself in the command trailer and said he wasn't coming out till sunrise, eventually came out. I remember sitting there sipping some coffee saying, "Are they going to believe this?" He said that we were definitely all going to have to pee in a bottle. That meant a urinalysis to see if we were on drugs. We had a good laugh about it. When we got back to the armory, I was pulled aside by my flight chief and my shift commander. I briefed them on what had happened, and my flight chief asked me to take home the statements and proofread them first before turning them in, before guard mount. The following day, I noticed that the roster had been amended. We were all going back to Morbach. It was very rare to have the same patrol twice, let alone being assigned to the same area. The bus ride out there was pretty quiet. When we approached the little shrine on the side of the road, I stopped the bus at the altar to make sure that the candle was lit. I wasn't taking any chances. The flight chief showed up around midnight, and we had a powwow regarding the previous night. He said we had two choices. We could turn in the statements, but omit the werewolf references, or shred the statements and write in the logbook that a wild animal had killed some deer in the wooded area behind the ammo building, and that the Forestmeister had been dispatched. End of story. We kind of just looked at each other, and he stated that if we went with the werewolf thing, our PRP would be called into question. PRP, Personnel Reliability Program, is what enables us to work around nuclear resources often found on Air Force bases. To lose your PRP could cast a dark cloud over your whole career. Plus, you got crap details while you were being reevaluated, which usually took up to 45 days. So we opted for the latter. Some of us chose not to talk about it, but obviously some did. It really happened. It wasn't some story to scare the Jeeps. Jeeps are FNGs, rookies, etc. Was it a werewolf? Was it an endangered European wolf? Was it a coincidence that the candle was out that night of a full moon? I'm not really sure. I'll just say this. The above statement is true, to the best of my knowledge. When I was researching the story of the Morbach monster, I was interested and no less surprised to find that the legend appears rooted in a degree of truth. According to various articles, the myth can be traced all the way back to the year 1812 and centers around the story of a man named Thomas Johann Baptist Schweitzer. Born in the Alsace region of France in 1785, Schweitzer joined Napoleon Bonaparte's Grand Army as a teenager, and by 1812 he was a battle-hardened veteran of numerous campaigns. But after Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia, Schweitzer decided that he had had enough of military life. As the Grand Army retreated through Germany, Schweitzer and a small band of men abandoned their posts and fled into the countryside, soon finding themselves on the outskirts of Wittlich, the same town where the Hahn Air Force Base was located in 1988. The deserters, driven by hunger and desperation, decided to raid a farmhouse for supplies, but things didn't go according to plan. After hearing the commotion, the farmer and his sons rushed in and confronted the bandits. Now panicked, Schweitzer and his gang attacked the family, brutally murdering the father and each of his children. It was only after they stopped screaming that Schweitzer noticed the boy's mother. She was standing in the farmhouse doorway, a look of stunned terror on her face. But as she approached, her fear turned into pure rage. With her last breath, the woman was said to place a curse on Schweitzer, stating that on every night of a full moon, he'd change into a rabid wolf. Schweitzer finished her off with a single blow to the head. As the story goes, the woman's death didn't stop the curse from taking full effect. As time went by and the moon came out, Schweitzer began to change. His body twisted and grew into that of a werewolf, driven only by rage and insatiable bloodlust. For many nights, this creature rampaged through the countryside. Entire herds of livestock were found slaughtered, and soon the mutilated bodies of men and women were turning up. But Schweitzer's growing depravity wasn't limited to murder. One night, he set his sights on a young woman named Elizabeth Byerly as she made her way home along a forest trail. Stepping out of the darkness and stopping Elizabeth in her tracks, Schweitzer, or the thing that used to be Schweitzer, lunged forward and tackled the defenseless woman to the ground. He didn't kill her. What he did was arguably worse. For many villagers in the Rhineland, this was the last straw. Arming themselves with muskets, torches, pitchforks, and plenty of silver, they set out to hunt down the werewolf once and for all. They finally found the beast hiding in the forests near the village of Morbach. The battle that followed was brutal, but in the end, the villagers prevailed. Schweitzer's reign of terror was over. Or so they thought. In order to prevent the werewolf's spirit from lingering, they decapitated the body and drove a stake through its heart before burying it beneath a remote crossroads. On its grave, a small shrine was erected, adorned with an image of the Virgin Mary. At its center, a lone candle would burn with an eternal flame that kept the evil spirit at bay. Whether this candle actually worked, that remains to be seen. Hey guys, thank you for sticking around here for the after action in the credits. In conjunction with a previous episode we did in Germany on various encounters military personnel had with the Aufhocker, which is essentially a German skinwalker variant, or probably what would be called a werewolf, these additional stories just seem to paint a picture of Germany being home to many of these creatures. I guess dogman would be another term for it. But yes, German folklore might have its roots in some degree of truth based on these stories. A lot of wolf stories out of Germany. Now, as discussed in the episodes on wolf attacks, obviously these stories could be derived from a history of medieval peasants fighting off bands of man-eating wolves. Jake, our writer, is recently engaged. Congrats, Jake. And his fiancée is apparently big into criminal psychology, and he told me that she made an interesting point when he discussed this episode with her. She pointed out that the idea of serial killers has only been studied within the past 100 years or so. So with the story of Thomas Schweitzer, it's interesting to think that in the early 1800s, people simply couldn't fathom the idea of a person being capable of such heinous crimes as serial killers now. They'd come across this brutal scene splattered with gore and mutilated bodies, and they would maybe try to rationalize it as the work of a wild beast, an animal, and not a human. So Schweitzer might just have been a deranged serial killer in his time, but to make sense of just how evil he was, people depicted him as a beast, or a man afflicted by some kind of supernatural evil. Possibly this happened years after the events happened, and hence his modern depiction as a werewolf. Jake's fiancé might be onto something, because I looked into some other German stories about actual werewolf trials and accusations, and found the story of Peter Stump. Peter was a wealthy German farmer in the late 16th century and became known as the Werewolf of Bedburg. In 1589, he was accused of horrifying crimes, including serial murder, cannibalism, witchcraft, and incest. He was severely tortured to get his confession, but he admitted to practicing black magic since age 12 and claimed the devil gave him a magical belt that transformed him into a wolf. Over a period of 25 years as a wolf, Stump confessed to murdering and eating 14 children and 2 pregnant women, even consuming the fetuses, and shockingly, the brain of his own son. He also admitted to an incestuous relationship with his daughter and relations with a succubus. On October 31st, Halloween, 1589, Stump endured a brutal execution. His flesh was torn with hot pincers, his limbs were broken, and he was finally beheaded, and his body was burned. His daughter and mistress were also executed alongside him. Some scholars propose that Stump might have been singled out for execution to ritually purge the community of evil. Also, there was a religious war raging in Europe at the time, the Cologne War, with the Catholic faction having gained control of the Bedburg region by 1589. It is thought that a brutal trial and execution like Stump's could possibly have served to deter Protestants from rebellion, thereby reinforcing Catholic power. There was one scholar who disputed this, stating that Stump was simply prosecuted for being a quote-unquote moral reprobate, rather than as a warning to Protestants. Peter Stump's case is documented in a 1590 pamphlet and other historical records, and it depicts a grim picture of what justice looked like in that era. In hindsight, as with Thomas Schweitzer, many would call him a serial killer. But like I said, others suggest that Peter was a scapegoat during religious conflicts, or that the werewolf label was applied later. So who knows how many other serial killer stories like these might exist where things got misconstrued or they were just deranged and claimed to be werewolves. But none of that really offers a sound explanation for the strange creatures that these and other soldiers have described encountering in Germany. Many more stories to come. Thank you for watching, for listening, for sharing, subscribing, liking, commenting, everything and anything you guys do to help support the channel. It is sincerely appreciated. As always, a huge shout out to both our Patreon and YouTube channel members for their incredible support. May God be with you no matter what you are dealing with, and I will see you in the next episode.